Jumping in on lunch. The day, as it's going to progress, is we're going to introduce you to a bunch of experts. But before we get to that and a couple of other announcements, let me start by asking everybody a question. How many of you are thinking about raising capital soon or actually out in the market right now? Raise your hand. So we got a couple of people kind of per table. That's great. So this event is for you. We did something like this about a year and a half ago, and it was very well received. The concept is raising money can sometimes be a little confusing, maybe intimidating, potentially even overwhelming. And if you're not sure about where to turn, we created this session to help you improve your odds when you're out looking for capital. And so that is our event today, Financing Options, co-hosted by Upsize Minnesota and Club Entrepreneur. For those of you who don't know who Upsize Magazine is, it's a how-to business magazine devoted to helping business owners build bigger and more profitable companies. I have Andy Telejohn from Upsize over to my right on the far left of the room. Club Entrepreneur and Upsize Magazine has been co-hosting and co-marketing events for about 4 years now. And a write-up about this particular event will be in the next issue of Upsize. So if you didn't get something written down and you want to double check whatever it is you heard, Upsize Magazine will be writing about it next issue. Likewise, my group, Club Entrepreneur, will post it on the Club E website. And so on behalf of the Minneapolis Club, our sponsor since 2007 when I started Club Entrepreneur, and Upsize Magazine, my group Club Entrepreneur, and Brimacombe Capital, we support folks like you who are trying to grow your businesses by helping you refine strategies, assemble resources, and secure funding. Okay, so the ground rules for today is I'm going to have 15 different financing options come up here and give you a 2 to 3 minute vignette about what they are about or what that category is about. So the goal is to introduce you to a bunch of different financing options. So kind of like when you go to a wine tasting event or some other social gathering where there are a bunch of appetizers, we're just trying to educate you a little bit about all these different options and hopefully turn you on to some things that maybe weren't on your radar before. And then if you could hold your questions until the very end, we're going to get through the 15 people, and then I allocated the time here today that we'd have some time afterwards that you can seek out the person or people that you most wanted to talk to. So we're going to finish up before 1 o'clock, have a little bit of time before we hit that stop at 1 o'clock, although I keep the room basically as long as anybody wants to stay here. But the intention was to not have questions while the people were up doing their little 2 to 3 minute song and dance, and then have you have an opportunity to connect with those folks afterwards. So those are the guidelines and what we're going to have here today. A couple of things. There is a little scorecard, if you will, of all the speakers on your table. If you want to write notes on that. Likewise, a little sheet with blue on it, which points you towards the Club E website if you want to learn about future events. Likewise, there's a calendar of the upcoming events on the table that Samantha over in the back that just took a bite of her food, but Samantha at McLeod supports Club E with our marketing and a number of my clients as well. And Sam put that together as well as the list of folks that are speaking here today. So thank you, Sam and McLeod. And the 15 categories are angels, angel groups, venture capital and early stage financing, growth capital and recapitalizations, mezzanine growth capital, banking, SBA, which is part of banking, but it's a separate thing, accounts receivable and inventory financing, customers, crowdfunding, contests and prizes, economic development, the SBIR, franchise financing, and then last but not least, very unique and I thought very interesting and exciting opportunity, intellectual property secured debt. So we have 15 different options here today, and I'm sure you will learn something, as I know I will as well. So to kick things off, Dave, why don't you come on up? Dave Herrig is the founder of MyStride, and we're kind of starting with, in some respects, maybe the higher risk earlier, the angel investing category. And then Dave is someone I've known for 6-7 years and been involved in businesses that he's done in the past. And actually turns out MyStride and Dave is the first formal investment that Brimacombe Capital did. So with that, I will turn it over to Dave and have him share some of his thoughts on angel investing.
Hi, everyone. Is this on?
It should be. Lean in.
Hello. Hi.
Okay.
Lot to cover. Just a couple minutes. As I think about angel investing, I really think about more of the stage. I'd really call it the idea stage. When an entrepreneur has nothing more than an idea, really, or there's far more things they don't know about their business than they do know. Going out and seeking capital is kind of the natural instinct at that point to go and write a business plan and just move forward. But in my experience, it's the stage of capital financing that's measured in the longest terms. Often years, sometimes 5 or 6 or 7 years. You can be working on something yourself, just slowly, gradually, with your own money, inching it forward little by little by little. And, I probably have talked to a dozen entrepreneurs, even a couple here today, and I hear this so often where they'll say, I'm working on this product and here's where I'm stuck. And once I get money, here's how far I'm going to go. And I think that thinking in terms of raising angel capital is a dead end. I think you have to kind of shift the mentality to being a value builder versus somebody who's buying value. And the analogy that often comes to mind is that caveman image where he's chiseling out a wheel. I think about that guy kind of as the first entrepreneur. That guy didn't sit around, and say, well, when I find angel investors, I'll hire a granite smith to chisel this out. He picked up a rock and a stone and started making it happen. And I think that's the mentality you need. And when you shift your mind to that, and you put everything you have continuously into it, it's a matter of when, not if. And because it's hard. Raising angel capital is really, really, really hard. It's the hardest stage. It takes the longest time. And being a value builder versus a value buyer is the single piece of advice I think I want to leave here.
And then just for everybody here, you've been working on MyStride for a little bit.
Yeah, we're building a platform for the equestrian industry, the horse industry, to allow riders to connect with service providers and products. And we're launching it this November. We're pretty excited about it. We've been developing it for about 18 months now. And basically the first 16 months of that was me and a small team just hammering it out in our garage. And if we had an extra $1,000, we put it into the product. There were months where we didn't go anywhere. We didn't get anything done because all you could really do was research and read. But we still tried to make that continuous progress forward, keep reaching out to people, keep letting them know what we're working on, and sharing the updates, and that strategy has worked. I've probably shared 50 updates with Rick over 2 years. Every month, hey, here's how far we got, here's a little bit more we did, and that ultimately worked.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, John Francis. Where's John? Right up here in front. John Francis. So Dave was talking about angel investing. John Francis is going to talk about angel groups. John's business Next Level Franchise, which he'll get into a little later because he's also talking about franchise financing. But he's here talking about the Sagas Club and angel groups. John.
Right. Thank you, Rick. So around town there are a number of groups of angels. Rather than individual angels investing with their own money one-off, there are groups that organize themselves and do this together as a club, or some are more organized than others. I'll tell you about the others that are more organized, and then I'll tell you about mine. So, probably the most well-known is the Twin Cities Angel Group. Their websites, you can Google these if you're interested. Twin Cities Angels, Go for Angels, Angel Pollination, which is a guy named Jeff Robbins who does a great job. The Sophia Fund is kind of a women-focused angel group, which I think is fabulous. St. Croix Valley, just across the river, they get into a lot of things in the neighborhood in the Twin Cities. And then Rick, of course, is a resource to a lot of those groups. And a guy he works with, Dick Summerstead, is a name you want to know. If you're interested in angel groups, Dick runs the Network Connect. So those are bigger, more organized groups. My group, with Rick and a couple other guys, is a little less structured, a little less formal. We call it Sages Club. I call it Deal Day, and what we do is have 3 events a year, and we invite 4 presenters to basically pitch to the group. So think Shark Tank without the sharks, but maybe a room full of sharks, maybe a room full of northerns, because it's Minnesota. And what we look for, guys that present best, what we've learned over the years of doing this, is post-revenue deals that are already going. Not true startups, not true concepts, but businesses where guys have done some work, got some revenue, and they're looking usually for growth capital or expansion capital. And we're always looking at the entrepreneur, the individual, the person, the product, the profit, the process, all of those normal evaluations. Our group, we make individual investments. We don't pool our money. If guys are interested, they follow up on the spot or afterwards. We have a website that's password controlled, which allows some access and kind of a data room for our presenters. And it's really been kind of fun to see the impact of giving these entrepreneurs a platform to share their deals with other people in our network who want to see deals. So that's why I call it Deal Day. Sages Club, SAGIS club.com.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Don't let John fool you. We're highly organized. We're so organized, we even have a password-protected website to store the materials and share them with about the 300 or so members. So he's downplaying the group a little bit. But and then John will come back up later and talk about franchise financing. Okay, Chris Reedy was over here. Come on up, Chris. So Chris is here to talk about venture capital and early stage financing, and I don't know how visible he has been with his new role. This might be a little bit of a coming out party, maybe at least for my community. A little bit. And then it's an honor and a pleasure to have Chris here because when he was working on his MBA, he was working with me at Sherpa Partners. So it's been super rewarding and fun to watch Chris progress with his career, smart guy, and if you can get Royal Street Ventures involved with your deal, you're going to be far better off for doing that. So with that, I'll let Chris tell you about venture capital and early stage financing.
Thanks, Rick. I got to look at my watch because I may be the only one who actually worked for Rick, so I know he'll just pull me off the stage if I go over. So I'm the first one at the podium who really represents investing other people's money in companies. So at a high level, the business model for venture capitalists is to go out and raise money from other people into a series of funds. In each fund, we're carefully investing that money and watching that money very closely in a very small number of companies. It's a little unusual for a single fund to invest in more than, say, 20 companies. So as you can guess, our investors typically want us to invest only in what we promised them we'd invest in. So most venture capitalists are pretty tight in terms of their description of what stage of investment will they invest in a company and what types of companies. For instance, at Royal Street, we invest in a lot of high growth, not very capital intensive digital businesses. But unfortunately, for all the great medical companies in town, we don't invest in anything that touches the FDA. So as you're thinking about venture capital as a way to finance your business, there are lots of great ways to research specific funds as you get an idea of what your company looks like. We typically invest in companies as venture capitalists after there's a fair number of proof points in the market. The company has some proof of product market fit. Maybe the company and the founders don't quite know how to scale the company. And the other thing I would say is it's a little unusual for venture capitalists to invest in a company without a strong core management team. So if you're a passionate founder working alone and think eventually you want to get venture capital, I would encourage you to think about if you really want to grow a big company that can generate a big exit for venture capitalists, who are the other people who you might be able to sell early on to join your team? Because that is, for us and every other venture capitalist, really important.
Okay. And then Chris, before you leave, what's bite size for Royal Street?
Yeah, typical first checks are between $250,000 and $1 million for Royal Street seed and Series A investments.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rick.
Okay, Gary, let's see, where's Gary? Right over here, come on up, Gary. All right, so growth capital and recapitalizations, Gary Kohler representing Air T. Gary's been in the investment community in a number of different capacities for a lot of years and done some very unique investing. And when you're sitting at the table and you're kind of wondering who the kind of the pansy is, right? And who's not the smartest guy at the table. If Gary's at your table, then you better start looking at yourself because a very bright man. Anyway, Gary.
That's the worst setup ever. I've known Rick for I can't even measure years, just decades.
Well, we used to both have dark hair back in the day. So
he was the kid. So So Rick wants me to talk about growth capital, which is, there are as many business models as there are in this room. There are more business models for venture capital and growth capital. So I really can only speak to the area intelligently. I can only speak to the area where we participate. So I'll give you a little bit of background about who I am, who I'm with. I spend most of my time running a small cap growth portfolio of public companies. But I sold my company last year to Air T. And Air T is a publicly traded holding company run by Nick Swenson, who wanted to be here today but couldn't. And we're an investment-driven holding company. We are investors thinking about the investment itself. We don't pigeonhole anything. We just sort of think about, is it a good investment, and that requires it to be a good business. So what we do is we participate in the area of growth capital for companies who for the companies that are past the startup phase. The next equity round they feel is just highly dilutive and expensive. Yet they can't borrow. They've probably already tapped out the traditional lending sources. They're not the kind of a business model that they can borrow from a bank, or they've already done their receivable and inventory financing. Banks are really very, very narrow lenders to young companies. So where we fit in is we will try to structure transactions, usually debt related, but not always, where we will look at assets beyond what banks are interested. We'll look at anything from real estate, intellectual property, basically any tangible asset that's an important part of the business that we're interested in. We have a history of we're Air T, so we wouldn't be surprised. We've done a lot of transactions in the aircraft industry where there are a lot of there are assets that a bank typically would have no way of getting their hands around. But so how we're structured is we have an investment fund internally. It's managed by managers of the business, and we look for transactions, and we'd look smaller and we'd look bigger, but say in the $2 to $10 million range. We typically are not looking, we're looking to participate in ownership. We're very flexible, and it can only be described as very much a very one-off kind of business. In the broader question of growth capital, there are lots of people who do what we do, but this area of growth capital, other than just the next round of equity, is it's really not the most organized area. There's lots and lots of ways to get together with lots of venture capitalists, but when you're starting to look at these alternative lender sorts of to lend in the venture space, it's not the most organized area, and you have to bang on a lot of doors and turn over a lot of rocks to see if someone will do a transaction of sort of the kind of nature that we do. We're not the only ones that do it, but it's not a highly organized group.
Okay. And then given your background from the hedge fund world as well as Nick's, that's part of why you're just open to lots of different kinds of transactions, correct?
You know, Nick and I, it's just investing is in our DNA, and that's why we do it. We like little companies. We've been in, you know, between both of us in our careers. Nick's more of a credit guy, more of an equity guy. You know, we've seen a lot of small businesses that became very, very valuable and have generated a lot of wealth. And some of them fall in the obvious categories that everybody wants to participate in, and they don't need us. And lots of them fall in the category as, wow, we just can't find any capital to do what we want to do, or it's really hard. And that's where we think, as investors, we add the most value.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Patrick Donohue. Patrick, where do I have you? Oh, right over there. Can't see through the podium. So Patrick Donohue is going to be speaking about mezzanine growth capital, and also a little bit of a coming out party, not a complete coming out party, but he's here to talk about Hill Capital Corporation. And they have a relatively new fund. And like Gary and I guess Chris and Dave, I've known Patrick for a number of years and had the pleasure of interacting with him on a number of different fronts. So Patrick, tell us a little bit about mezzanine growth capital and then also Hill Capital.
Excellent, thank you. So this is an event I've been the most excited about in a long time, because it's a subject that I'm very passionate about, because within financing businesses, which has been pretty much my whole career, I've come to realize over the last few years that a lot of people are unfamiliar with all the real options out there. And I've come to realize that a lot of people believe that there's bank financing and then there's pure equity. And there's a massive space in between. And so it was a perfect opportunity to be after Chris and after Gary to kind of explain how we view the world. When a company has growth opportunities, but it's not shoot the roof growth opportunities, it is going to be limited in its ability to attract venture capital, because that, of course, needs really high rates of return. A bank is going to be limited based on assets and cash flows and so forth. And so we look at the world like what Gary was talking about, to come in and to be able to structure financing that matches the need of that business. And since we have private capital, we are structured like what Chris has mentioned. We have investors in our fund, so I have a fiduciary duty to that investor base, and we have a cost of capital. But it is our job to go around and turn around and to invest in businesses, and we look to structure those investments in a way that makes sense for that business and for us as investors. So we can be hands-on to help them out, but we can also make sure that that cost of capital meets what that business is going to achieve. And so I was really happy to see the breadth of presenters here today to help people understand that you don't need to be the next Google. You could have a nice business that's a small business that's doing 5%, 10% growth, and you have financing options to give you that extra capital beyond what you can fully get from an SBA loan or the bank. And so that's what we're very interested in providing.
Great. Before you leave, tell us just a bite size and kind of what Hill Capital's looking for.
Yep. Thank you. We are, bite size is $500,000 to $1 million. Businesses, ideally $5 million more in revenues. And we do have some flexibility on that because, again, we have a private base of investors. But what we like to tell people is we will take execution risk, but we don't want to take concept risk. And so that's where we shy away from the startups.
Great. Thank you very
Excellent.
much.
Thank
Thanks.
You, Rick.
Okay, Troy RosenBrooke from Highland Bank. Troy joined Highland Bank now 6 months? Oh, a year ago. Time flies when you're having fun. So we're moving up the balance sheet and going now into kind of the pure debt portion. Troy, tell us a little bit about the banking category and how Highland Bank fits.
Sure. I think we've had a good discussion already about how this is really a spectrum of funding, all the way from equity through debt. And so I'm here to talk a little bit about more traditional banking position. So what a bank typically looks at is more predictable earnings, predictable cash flow, versus some of the previous speakers who are earlier in the stage of funding. But I think it's important to understand that we also work with a number of those people. This conversation today is really not about picking one or the other. I think many of them we work with on a fairly regular basis. We work with private equity, we work with a mezz lender, we work with an asset-based lender at times. And so I think this is not mutually exclusive when you're thinking about this spectrum. It's about putting together perhaps a number of these parties in order to move your organization along. As a debt provider, we are typically looking at sort of basic things like real estate lending, equipment lending, line of credit lending. Those are the sort of the standard sort of options that we have on the table. In terms of setting appropriate expectations, we do fixed rate lending, we do floating rate lending. We typically have some kind of financial covenants around the cash flow of the organization and around its tangible net worth. We have standard reporting. It might be monthly, it might be quarterly, but it's certainly annually at a minimum. And so you can hear, as Rick said, we're moving up in a different spectrum of funding than what some of the other previous speakers were talking about. You can kind of expect to have personal guarantees when you talk to us about financing, especially as the businesses are smaller in nature. As was referenced earlier, we are looking for experience, both industry experience, but also management experience and financial experience. Those are all things that are important to us, so it's not just about the numbers. The purpose traditionally has been real estate acquisition, real estate expansion, equipment financing, working capital, meaning receivables and inventory financing, merger and acquisition activity, as well as other business expansion. So that's really the spectrum that we fit in this conversation today.
Great. And you have 5 branches around the metro, but also lend across the state, correct?
Correct, yes. We're a family-owned community bank here in the Twin Cities with 5 locations. We're about a $530 million bank, which everyone cares about, except for bankers, no one cares about. And really what that translates into is we lend up to about $9 million. After that, we have to bring in partners to get things done.
Great.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So Kim's story is also at Highland Bank, and I'm having Kim talk about the SBA because while part of banking is its own kind of subset, and I think from a company perspective, it's important to understand the differences and the nuances. And so Kim, tell us a little bit about SBA lending.
Great, thanks Rick. So there is a lot of SBA activity in this market. Minnesota is consistently one of the top SBA lenders in the country, which is awesome. That's why we do a lot of it here. Banks pull in SBA loans when they're looking at companies that maybe need a longer maturity for their loan, maybe have a little thinner collateral margin, don't have enough assets, or maybe it's a less seasoned kind of a startup business or a company that's maybe like a service business or something like that. So by having an SBA guarantee, that really provides that additional degree of protection that a lender is going to want to provide that loan to a company. So basically, by having a guarantee, you can kind of absorb the risks associated with the fact that a business is newer, maybe in a particular industry that you maybe don't always lend to, or, as I mentioned, needing that longer repayment ability. So a bank makes the loan, and it's guaranteed by the SBA. So if you're looking for SBA loans, you go to a bank in town, and then they actually work through the SBA to get that loan done. So there's 3 primary programs that are kind of the most popular in SBA. So there's the 7A program, and that provides loans like for equipment purchases, business acquisitions, long-term working capital. You can do real estate with that program, and that program goes up to $5 million. Then there is the 504 loan program, and banks primarily use that for commercial real estate. And that debenture piece can actually go up to $5 million, so your building loan could go up to like almost $11 million using that program. The only caveat is that the small business owner has to occupy 51% or more of that building, so it can't be investment property, it has to be owner occupied. And then there's another smaller program that really comes in handy for, you know, some companies. It's called the Express Loan Program, and that program offers loans up to $350,000. Banks primarily use that for lines of credit, and there's certainly a need for companies that maybe need a line, you know, less than $350,000. So we do a lot of those annually. So there's, you know, the SBA really allows the bank to underwrite the loan, but there are some requirements that every bank in the country has to follow when they're looking at SBA financing. And it's basically equity, collateral, and repayment. So as far as equity goes, the small business owner has to put in at least 10% if they're looking at a new business, or if they're acquiring business, or if they're buying real estate. A bank might want 15-20%, but the SBA is saying at least 10%. So we can't finance more than 90% of the cost of one of those things, which is pretty generous. I think conventionally a bank is going to want maybe 20-25% down. I've already been asked about collateral a couple of times in this session. So the SBA, you know, I mean, they require the business to pledge all their assets. If there's a shortfall in those assets and they have equity in their primary real estate, they do have to pledge a mortgage on that. Otherwise, there's no requirement for having a loan fully secured. So basically, you know, that opens up the window for a lot of, you know, software companies or service companies that don't have the assets to secure it, and they can get an SBA loan with that. And then also repayment is kind of the third thing. So a company has to show that they have the ability to repay the loan. So it's kind of past that venture capital stage where they actually have to show that they can, if they can't historically projected, they have to show that they can service that debt. So I think it's a great option for companies that are maybe kind of in between venture capital stage and conventional financing. As long as they have, you know, a reasonable equity investment, adequate collateral, or at least they're pledging what they have, and they're able to furnish, you know, the ability to repay the loan from earnings, then that's like our quintessential SBA candidate.
Great. And then what location are you out of at Highland?
I'm in Maple Grove,
Maple
but
Grove.
I travel all over the place.
But you
so.
travel all over. Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, Kathy, come on up. Kathy Sadaqa of Sage Business Credit will be talking about accounts receivable and inventory financing. And I also have known Kathy for a number of years and interacted on a number of fronts. And she's actually a holdover from a year and a half ago or whenever we did this last time. So welcome back, Kathy, and tell everybody about accounts receivable and inventory financing.
Thanks. So I'll start by giving you a couple of typical scenarios. Number one, you've got a contract manufacturer who's got 3 years of business under their belt. They have a bank line of credit but are growing fast and need an increase to their line of credit. The bank, having already financed the purchase of equipment and provided a line of credit, says they can't do anything more at this time. And oh, by the way, the line they have needs to pay down to zero. Number two, a company with a great new food product who's been selling to Lunds and Byerly's for 5 years, bootstrapping it the whole way. Now Costco and Target want to place sizable orders on net 60-day terms, but the already stretched co-packer requires payment in 30 days. 3 banks have already said the same thing. Come back in 2 to 3 years when the company's showing consistent sales and profitability. These are just 2 examples of the types of problems new companies have with growth and funding. The good news is asset-based lenders can help. Where banks tend to look in the rearview mirror and at historical performance when making their lending decisions, asset-based lenders look at the future. They look at your sales. Our underwriting process involves understanding the sales process. What product or service are you selling, and who are you selling it to? The bottom line is, did you deliver what your customer asked for, and are they willing and able to pay for it? With advance rates ranging anywhere from 70 to 90% of accounts receivable and up to 60% of inventory when paired with an accounts receivable loan, asset-based lending facilities allow you to get the most cash out of your business. And did I mention that ABL loans are scalable? They'll grow with your business without the hassle of having to circle back around to a credit committee. Getting started is easy. Complete an application, provide some financial information, agings, inventory reports. After a signed proposal, funding can happen in as little as 5 to 10 business days. Keep in mind that an inventory loan will typically require an on-site collateral exam and potentially an appraisal, which may delay funding by 2 to 3 weeks. Asset-based lending is perfect for manufacturing, distribution, business services, and transportation industries. Typically, people come to us with little or no operating history, a history of losses. They're often highly leveraged, and it's not uncommon that the owners have a credit score that has taken a beating. The cost is somewhat more than traditional bank financing, but significantly less than online loans, and it doesn't require giving up equity. I'm happy to talk specifics with anyone who'd like to hear more.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, Scott, right up in front, come on up. So we're shifting gears now to kind of go away from traditional sources of funding and kind of traditional ways of thinking about funding into a couple of things that are maybe not quite on the top of the list, but I think should definitely be on the list. We're going to start with that by funding your business on the backs of your customers. And so Scott Clawson is here to tell us a little bit about TimeSolve and how they're using their kind of core business to grow the company. Scott.
All right. Thanks, Rick. I'm actually pinch hitting for our CEO who's overseas taking his daughter to Morocco for semester abroad. So to tell you a little bit about TimeSolve, we are a time and billing software company. We are mainly for lawyers, but really for any professional service organization that has to track time and place them on invoices. We are web-based, and we are subscription models, SaaS, software as a service. So our customers pay us every month to gain access to our software. We were originally developed in 1999 by a division of Thomson Reuters, and then our CEO, who was working at Thomson at the time, spun him off in 2006 through his own initial investment. It was not an insignificant amount, as Rick told me, but he was able to do it himself and brought on an additional partner who is now our CTO, who also invested in it. And from that initial investment they made in 2006, we have been 100% funded by our customer revenue, which is probably where we all want to be, eventually, where we can grow our company because of the sales and the revenue that is coming in. Now, for TimeSolve, there's a couple of things that have made this possible since 2006 to see the growth that we have, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. One is the fact we're a virtual office. We all work from home, so there's not that overhead cost of a brick and mortar mortgage to pay or whatever it might be. And it also means that I'm not wearing cargo shorts this afternoon in my basement office where I would normally be. The second kind of important thing I think with the way we're able to fund ourselves is that subscription model, that monthly recurring revenue model, which means that even if I don't have a sale at all that comes in this month, I still got revenue coming in from my existing client base. And so because of that reliable income source from our customers, we were able to really focus more on the product for the first 6 or 7 years after the spinoff from Thomson Reuters. And yes, it didn't happen in 18 months or 2 years or whatever it might be in making the product as strong as it is today. It did take a lot longer. One of the other things that we have an advantage of is that we have tapped into a great offshore pipeline, which again reduces costs for us. About half of TimeSolve employees are headquartered in Pakistan, including all of our dev team and about half of the marketing department that works under me. So for that first 6 or 7 years, we were able to focus on the product, not be as concerned about sales growth, customer growth, and so on. But for the last 4 or 5 years now, we have the product is where it needs to be. We have turned our attention towards growing acquisition, customer retention. I was brought on board as the first marketing director TimeSolve I've ever had 2 years ago. And we've seen now that kind of slow incremental growth starting to turn into a little bit of that hockey stick shaped growth on the graph. 2017, we saw 36% revenue growth. We're going to see over 40% this coming year, but it has all been just based on the revenue. So I guess, you know, you could look at it, if this is a race between the turtle and the hare, we're definitely the turtle in that it's been low and slow, but it is sustainable, and it can happen if you have, I think, the right model in place.
Right, and some companies have a story that the financing community is going to get excited about, and other companies are a little bit, nothing against TimeSolve, but a little bit more kind of blocking and tackling, and that was part of what intrigued me with TimeSolve, and I've been working with them for a couple of years, was just kind of steady Eddie wins the race, and congratulations on that.
Yeah, thanks, Rick.
Thank you. Okay, Brian Hedstrom. Where's Brian? Right over here. Okay, so Brian is going to talk to us about crowdfunding. Brian is our first attorney here today, so welcome to the podium. And by the way, this is not billable in his time, so it's free advice, but Brian's an expert in the crowdfunding world, and if I look back not too far ago, this wasn't an option, and so now today it is a financing option, so tell us a little bit about that market.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name's Brian Hedstrom. I work for a firm called Avisen Legal here in downtown Minneapolis, and as far as crowdfunding goes, there's really two types of crowdfunding that you might hear about: rewards crowdfunding and securities crowdfunding. And rewards crowdfunding is the Kickstarter, Indiegogo type model where businesses or people that want to support a cause are raising money without promising something financial in return, other than, you know, a free T-shirt or something like that. Securities crowdfunding is a newer option where businesses can raise money by approaching accredited investors and non-accredited investors online through a crowdfunding portal in order to sell securities. So that could be a debt offering or an equity offering made online through a registered portal. And there's two main laws that have passed recently that can benefit Minnesota businesses that are interested in securities crowdfunding. Regulation crowdfunding, or Reg CF, is a federal law that allows businesses to raise up to $1.07 million in 12 months from investors anywhere in the country. And Minvest is a state law that you may have heard about that allows Minnesota-based companies to raise up to $2 million in 12 months, so long as that's raised from Minnesota residents only. So since those laws have passed, it's been a couple years now, in Minnesota, I think there have been about 13 Minvest offerings, about half of which have been successful. And the way securities crowdfunding works is you set both a minimum target and a maximum target of how much you want to raise. And the minimum target is sort of the minimum viable number you need to do the project that you're raising money for. And until you hit that minimum, all investors' funds are held in an escrow account. So if you don't hit that minimum, the money's returned to investors. If you hit it, then you can collect it and keep going. So about half of the 13 Minvest deals have closed so far. And the one tip I would say about crowdfunding is keep in mind that the most successful crowdfunding offerings are where the business brings its own crowd. So it's unlikely that you can just post something online and expect people to stumble on it and invest in it. More likely, if you can engage with a community that might be interested in supporting your business first, and then engage in a crowdfunding offering and try to drive folks to that offering on the portal, that's the best way to do it. So thank you.
Great. And Avison's a new firm?
Yes, Avisen. We just had our 1 year anniversary this past weekend. There's 7 or 8 attorneys now, including one of counsel. And we're very excited to be working with entrepreneurs and businesses of all sizes. So
great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Garrett Film. Garrett is here to specifically talk about the Clean Tech Open, but the category is contest and prizes. Minnesota Cup is going on right now and is highly visible here locally. One of my companies is a finalist, so that's great. Clean Tech Open, I've worked a number of years with, looking backward, and Clean Tech Open, another very visible organization here in town. And Garrett, tell us a little bit about contests and prizes and Clean Tech Open.
Thank you, Rick. Glad to be here today. So every startup and new venture needs funding. You need to bring money into your business so that you can get started, that you can grow, right? You can scale, you can do the things you need to do. So since you have to do that, why not do that in a way that gives you the most learning, the greatest fun, and puts you in contact with wonderful people that are really committed to your success and trying to help you make a better business out of your vision and your dream. You may even win cash awards by joining a competition. That's typically why people do it at the first order. But I wouldn't necessarily put that into your funding plan. The investors may think that that's a great sign of confidence, but not necessarily a great sign of planning acumen. In fact, alternative may not be the appropriate word, but additional may be a better word for how you may bring funding into your business as a prize category. So how does competition really work? There are many, many types of competitions hosted and sponsored by a great number of different organizations and entities. They can range from relatively modest, short-term, on the order of weeks to a few months, of pitch competitions, or even very short, couple of week competitions with relatively low or no entry fees, and hundreds of dollars or a few $1,000s of money that you may win from that. And they can range on up to many tens and even hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the award beyond a prize may also include direct investment, and those can be substantial numbers on the order of 6 figures or more in those cases. So there's definitely an opportunity or a potential to win and bring in direct cash, to bring in additional funding through the investment that you may find from a given incubator or accelerator that hosts one of these programs. But there are 3 other reasons really that you would want to join the competition, and that is education. Many programs offer a great training program and curriculum, largely around lean startup model and the business model canvas paradigm. It's converging to that as a standard right now. Great experience working with wonderful people across all domains. John Francis and Rick referenced Dick Summerstead. He is actually the Investor Connect Chair for the Clean Tech Open. We have a contestant here from our cohort this year, Tony Koop. And then we have one of the world's most prolific mentors that I know of here in the program as well. So these are great people who are really committed to your success, and they want to see you benefit. So those 2 things, again, education and experience are invaluable, but then you also get exposure, right? Things like the Investor Connect events and your ability to network on those, both at the local level as well as on the national level. And of course, in the case of the Clean Tech Open, there's even international exposure opportunities.
Great. And what's the website for the Clean Tech Open?
CleanTechOpen, one word, .org.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, Chris Gastner. So Chris works for the Community and Economic Development Associates, here to talk about economic development, kind of like the contests and prizes and kind of like crowdfunding. Looking backward in time, it wasn't as big of a option for companies. That has become a very nice option. Chris is here to tell us a little bit about this as a category, and then his firm as well. Chris.
Thank you. Well, in economic development, I think an easy way to define it, everybody asks me what it means. It's a way to tie 2 words together that I think are very commonly used together, and that's creativity and government, right? It's becoming more and more prevalent in getting deals done. The checklist used to be that you put your business plan together, check. You go to the bank and ask them for a loan, check, and then we struggle to put the rest of the money together. Now, one of the next checks is stopping maybe at City Hall or stopping at a regional economic development organization because they might have some tools that can help you in this deal. A couple of those tools aren't so much on the lending side, like tax increment financing or tax abatement. Those are some things that I could talk all day on their own. But the one that I wanted to talk about today, just based on the framework of what we're discussing, is gap financing. Gap financing basically means that if you had a $100 deal and you went to your bank, banks can usually participate up to 75% of a deal. So that gets you $75. You have $10 in your pocket, so you're still short $15. That's where organizations like us can fit, is helping you fill that gap for that $15. So I think in terms of process, a lot of times, even though we're government entities, in a lot of cases, at city halls are where these processes take place, there's, which is going to sound weird, but a lot more flexibility in those programs to be able to use them for things that a little bit more traditional lenders might have a little more heartburn around, things like working capital or thin margins when it comes to collateral, tougher positions to take in second and third positions on mortgages and things like that that tend to make traditional lenders a little bit more nervous. In a lot of cases, economic development organizations are trying to get creative to get these deals done for their communities. And my organization works in rural communities, usually populations under 10,000, but it's not unique to that. Maybe where you look for those dollars is a little bit different. In our smaller communities, it's typically at City Hall, whereas maybe in larger areas, it's in a regional economic development organization. Could even be things like utility cooperatives. I know they do some gap financing as well. So I guess the message when it comes to economic development is to get creative, to look for places that maybe you, or look in places that maybe you wouldn't have traditionally looked to find some dollars that can help your deals.
And at what stage should somebody reach out to you?
I'd say as early as possible. A lot of times the economic development organizations can even help you with things like completing that business plan or putting together financial projections and things like that. So the earlier that you get them involved in the conversation, the more time they have to get creative to come up with those dollars that can help.
And any industry focus or anything?
I'd say it runs the gamut. It kind of depends on the region of the state or the region that you're in, depending on what those industry sectors are going to be most likely or most understandable for that area. In southeastern Minnesota, we got the Mayo Clinic. You see a lot of medical ventures down there, so you get more comfortable with the terminology, but that doesn't mean that's all that those organizations will work in.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Chris. See you. Okay, Becky Astrup. Becky, come on up. So Becky's firm, BBC Entrepreneurial Training and Consulting Group, and she's going to talk about the SBIR. And then Becky and I interacted when she was at the state a number of years back, and so she is definitely a domain expert in this category. So Becky, tell us a little bit about the SBIR.
Love to do that. I cut my teeth on this program back with Surmatics, who some of you may be aware of. Did a lot of SBIR funding, about $42 million prior to going public. If you're doing anything in technology development, and that technology can be medical technology, software technology, military technology, education, if you're doing anything like that where you're doing research and development, the government could be a potential grant opportunity for you to offer non-dilutive funding. So unlike the great ideas that everybody else has and the great companies that are here, this actually will not require you to pay anything back. It will not require any equity to be given up in your firm, and you own the intellectual property that you develop as a result of this. So if you're a small business, it's run under the auspices of the SBA program, and it's run by 11 different agencies of the federal government, everything from National Science Foundation, Department of Defense, National Institutes of Health, Department of Agriculture, et cetera, transportation. So basically, one of the great things is that yes, you can have it can be brain surgery, it can be rocket science, and yes, this will fund it. And it'll fund it when all these other lenders or equity investors will give you the statement, come back when. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard that before. Come back when you have more data, come back when you have your patent, come back when you have your first customer, and you're saying, that's what I need the money for. That's what this program is for, is to be a very early stage investment, take that technology risk that other people don't want to take. So it's a tremendous opportunity for you, or if you have clients in that area, to allow them to raise money to prove their concept.
Great. Thank you very much, Becky. Thanks. Non-dilutive being the key word there that I wrote down. Non-dilutive financing. Nicely done. Okay, John Francis, otherwise known as Johnny Franchise, coming up for an encore performance, and with the nickname Johnny Franchise, I think you can guess what he's going to talk about here. So, John, tell us a little bit about the franchise finance world.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, franchising is a great way to grow, but not everything should be franchised, that's for sure. Franchising is generally a method of doing business. It's not always considered its own industry, but there are hotels and gas stations, restaurants, hair salons, dry cleaners, I mean, you name it. Lots of franchising out there in the world. So as a franchisor, which is the company that has the brand and the system and expands through franchisees, the strategy, I would say, the caution about franchising is it's regulated by the Federal Trade Commission. So in order to sell a franchise and become a franchise brand of any kind of business, you have to get a certain amount of paperwork done, and there's audited financial statement requirements, legal registrations with the feds, and in 14 registration states. If you want to sell a franchise in that state, Minnesota is one of them, you have to get properly registered. So that process costs money and time to become a franchise. My estimate is it's anywhere from 25 to 50,000. And so the conversation I usually have, which I had yesterday with a gal here in the room, is build more units and prove your model before you really want to franchise. You only want to franchise it when you know it's going to be franchisable and successful for a franchisee. The flip side of the franchise model is the franchise owner. So the strategy around franchising is those owners who own and operate those units, they spend their time, their money, their energy. It's their business. They're following your model and your brand and paying you a fee and a royalty and all the things that go with it. But it's a tremendous point of leverage to grow a system and a network, and particularly retail services or retail outlets. But there are commercial franchises, there are B2B franchises, there are different types and categories all over the place. But the franchisees usually finance with cash, ideally, home equity, kind of traditional things. IRA and 401k rollovers is a popular way for people to finance their deal. These are entrepreneurs who want to own their own business, but they don't want to be alone, or they don't want to start their own. They want to work through somebody else's system and brand and support and training and all the things that go with it. SBA is a big source of franchise funding. I'm sure you guys see a lot of that at Highland Bank. Franchise has a thing called the registry. If you're a franchise and you get on the registry, the SBA, it's kind of a green light. They've previewed all your documents and they know that you're legit. There are franchise groups, kind of like the other group. There are groups that focus on franchises. There are all kinds of layers and levels of franchise financing for equipment, sometimes the fees, capital improvements, inventory. Again, it depends on the deal and the borrower, of course, the franchisee. But it's their deal. There are also one thing to mention around franchising is for veterans. There are some very interesting initiatives around putting veterans in business as franchisees. And that's something to be considered if you're a veteran looking to invest in a franchise. So franchising is a very powerful way of growing a brand. I would say it's nothing I've seen ever anywhere else works as well when the franchisor and the franchisee and the supplier companies all do their job. Franchise systems have tremendous success and all over the world. So I love franchising. I guess that's it. And it's a great way to go, but it's not for everything. So you should really be careful and think about it. But if you want some advice, let me know. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, last but not least, Pete Birkland of Secured Secured 2 or Secured Squared? Well, he'll correct me. IP Secured Debt. So Darren Klum is a longtime friend and the CEO there, and Darren and I got together a handful of months ago, and Darren was talking to me about the financing strategy that you all were on, and I was very interested and wanted to share it with the group, so I was actually kind of the kernel to kick today off. And then we heard Gary Kohler talk a little bit about IP portfolios and securitizing those. So Pete, tell us a little bit about what you folks did in this category.
Sure. Thanks, Rick. So it's Secured 2. Secured Squared, it's too hard to type. So to be honest, and you can't have a URL with a raised to the power, so we're Secured 2. What we do, Secured2 is a data security company. We create products to indemnify and secure data. We were approached by this fund, the HIM fund, and they had done some due diligence on us, talked to people, and they asked us if we would be interested in a financing option where they would invest a convertible term note in our company secured by our intellectual property. Right now we have about 7 issued patents. We have 17 patents in process. So it was somewhat of a good match. Business-wise, it was a good fit for us because, one, our company had gotten to a point where we needed expansion capital to grow sales and marketing and product support, but we did not have, in essence, the metrics or really what we needed to attract equity financing or venture capital. So it kind of met our needs and it met their needs. So what are we looking at in terms of what does the product look like? It's a convertible term note and it converts based on milestones that we agree to with the funder. We pay interest only on the note over the term, and they can convert at their discretion anytime after 36 months. So, while you say great, guess what? You don't have to deal with valuation, you don't have to do with that. There's still some things you have to be aware of, right? You've got a monthly interest-only payment you've got to make, so you've got to build that into your model, and as you grow, make sure that you can cover that. You are going to more than likely give up equity, or you're going to have a term loan that you have to pay off at a certain point in the future. So you've got to have that available to handle. And then you have to be able to look at how you do additional financings. So if you go out and if we have to go out and raise additional equity or that, we have to make sure that we have work with funders in that have the ability to either pay off that debt or are willing to absorb that debt and let that live on our balance sheet. So while it's a great thing to say, great, you get a large amount of capital, you get to use it, there's still some things down the road that you have to deal with. Now, why is it good for us? Like I said, we were able to get the capital we needed to grow the business. Dilution is based on how we perform. So we made a bet on ourselves that said, we're going to perform, we're going to beat our expectations on what we think on those milestones, and we're going to reduce our dilution. And we really only have to do interest-only payments on the debts. We aren't servicing a principal payment. So that's kind of where we're at on that financing.
And you, as the CFO, if it cleared the hurdle with you, presumably it's good for the company.
Yeah, it was. To be honest, we needed to have a larger amount of capital in our business to go. A smaller round, a traditional seed round wasn't going to do a lot for us for what we needed to do with some of the partner opportunities we had and some of what we needed to put into the business.
All right, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, again, I left a little bit of time so you could seek any of these folks out that you wanted to talk to. I'm going to just go around the room, so refresh everybody's memory. We have Dave Herrig, who spoke about angel financing over there. John Francis, to my immediate right, talked about both angel groups as well as the franchising market. Chris Reedy over here to my left, talking about venture capital and early stage financing. Gary Kohler to the left of this, my left, right of the stage, growth capital and recapitalizations. Patrick Donohue, also right over there, talking about mezzanine growth capital. Troy RosenBrooke, Highland Bank over here. Kim Story, Highland Bank, right over here, talking about banking and the SBA. Accounts receivable financing and inventory financing. Kathy Sadaqa, over there. Sorry. All right. And then Scott, right up here in front, Scott Clawson, talked about customers, financing, crowdfunding. Brian Hedstrom over here, contests and prizes. Garrett right over here. Let's see, Chris Gastner over to my right over there, talking about economic development, SBIR. Becky right over here to my left. And then last but not least, Pete Birkland, over here to my left as well, talk about the IP secured debt. Seek those folks out. They're good people. I'm sure they can help solve your capital financing needs. And then last but not least, there is a list of upcoming events on the table. With that said, the next couple are September 6th, women-owned businesses, and then again September 6th. That, by the way, is an encore of an event that we did last January. Scaling Your Cash is September 20th. Family Business Guide, September 25th, and Rick Wall's going to be on that panel. And Rick is a return participant and had some fun stories and funny stories about his family experience at Highland Bank. And then Club E is a co-sponsor of Irish Titans Ecom Forum, which is September 27th, and I saw a couple, one over there, Darren Lynch, and I don't know if anybody else ended up coming, but Darren can tell you about the Ecom Forum on September 27th. So thank you for coming. Feel free to reach out to the people, stay as long as you'd like. Oh, when you leave, can just tell the folks at the ramp that you were at the Clubby event, and thank you, and see you next time.